So my section was on 2.2.2, the second half. It's labeled Addressing Earlier Technologies, in which we discuss the Supreme Court's stance on the Fourth Amendment as throughout history. And so our first case, it was from 1928, Olmstead versus United States. The government used wiretaps on telephone lines without court order and got a conversation and used it in court. The Supreme Court decided it did not go against the Fourth Amendment, stating that it only was to protect against physical intrusion and the search and seizure of material things, not conversations. So ideally, the government was stating that unless something physical or material was being protected, then it didn't count. And so Justice Louis Brandeau here argued against his decision, against this decision, stating that conversation should also be protected. He believed that new technologies giving the government access to our personal documents and conversations without entering the home would should still require court orders. In 1967, in Katz versus United States, they went against their original stance on Olmstead. Law enforcement had placed electronic listening and recording devices outside of a telephone booth to record a suspect's conversations. The court claimed that the Fourth Amendment protects people and not places, and what we claim is private, even if it is public, may be constitutionally protected. So the idea is that the guy who was being listened to felt that the telephone booth was private, and even though it was a public area, and the court was with him. So they ruled that any place where a person has a reasonable expectation of privacy requires a court order. This obviously comes into trouble, because how do we interpret a reasonable expectation of privacy? So Smith versus Maryland was kind of one of the first ones that felt this dilemma. What is a reasonable expectation of privacy? And since it caused so much trouble, they decided to interpret it in a very restrictive way, but didn't really state much on what that restriction was. So in 1976, United States versus Miller, they ruled that the information shared with the business, such as a bank, does not fall under reasonable expectation of privacy. So handing over our social security numbers and important documentation to our bank or to the hospital or anything like that does not fall under reasonable expectation. You can't assume that it will be private data. This implies also then our web activity is not protected under the Fourth Amendment, since we hand over all of that data to our internet providers and such. So then in 2001, Kylo versus United States, law enforcement used a thermal imaging device to search a home from the outside without a search warrant. So police were just kind of sitting outside the house and had this big device, and they just could see everything from the outside. And so this is where it got really really troublesome, because what's the point of a Fourth Amendment if the police officers don't even have to take a step inside the home? And so the court retaliated, stating that the government using a device is not in general public use to explore details of the home that would previously have been unknowable without physical intrusion. The surveillance is a search. And so what they're stating is that they're against this, because if this technology did not exist, then they would need to have a physical intrusion and therefore a court order. So it should be no different whether the device makes it so that they don't have to step in there, or if they did, in an early time did have to step in there. So does that mean that our technology becomes more widely used? The government can use these technologies for surveillance without a warrant? Well, they don't really talk too much about that issue, but at least put the question in our minds. So then the the question that this section kind of was addressing is, should the Fourth Amendment protect against the search of a home where a warrant would have been necessary without the technology? Um, I personally think that yes, it should protect against where a warrant would have been, since if we were in an earlier time, then this sort of stuff would have been needed, and it just kind of seems useless to have a Fourth Amendment if they don't even need to have physical to do this physical intrusion, and instead could just find a technology that'll do it for them. Um, so yeah, that's my section.